What springs to mind when I ask you about your religious or spiritual background?
Well, I was raised going to a United Church, though pretty casually, a little bit infrequently. And my memories of it are mostly positive, the ones that I do have. The minister's wife, who really was like a co-minister and probably should have been treated as such, was a musician. And so she wrote a lot of songs for the kids to perform together. So I really remember being at the front with a shaker or a tambourine and singing songs with other kids, and that the church had that sort of environment. So I wasn't really harmed by that aspect of my upbringing in the way that a lot of UUs were, especially people with more marginalized identities. But then when I was around 14 or 15, a few of my close friends who were from secular families, they were proselytized to by a Baptist church, that they all went to church camp and they got born again. And I started attending there. And it's an age when a lot of people start having big questions, that's why in UU land, we do coming of age at around that time, where we encourage people to ask their questions and find their own answers. But in that Baptist church environment, they weren't very open to questions. And my questions were just growing and growing. But I still really wanted to be part of my friendship community. And so I tried to shut myself in my room. I remember this weekend saying, I really need to have an epiphany. I need to have an experience of Jesus coming into my life. And so I was doing a lot of reading. I was listening to like pop gospel albums. And I got to the end of a book called Answers to Questions About Christianity. And the type of the book changed from regular, 12-point to like 8-point font. And it was trying to explain why there are two different creation stories in Genesis. And it was kind of like that Shakespeare quote, I think it's from Hamlet, like, methinks he doth protest too much. Like, why are they going to such great lengths to try to prove this is true? And I had an epiphany, but it was the opposite of the one that I wanted to have. I just said, oh, wow, none of this is true. I don't believe any of this anymore. And that was a big moment of awakening for me, where I stopped identifying as Christian, and I really left church at that point. But it wasn't really a huge issue in my family. I don't think we ever really even talked about it, because my parents were Christian in such a casual way that it wasn't a rift with them. It was more a rift with my friends.
Which is still a big experience as a teenager, right?
It was a big experience. Again, like not harmed the way that I know a lot of people have been harmed by their religious upbringing, but yeah, definitely still some tender feelings about it at the time. And just a lack of a sense of belonging, especially because my questioning was so unwelcome. So when I sometimes tell the story that my spouse and I became UU because we went to the first membership session in the young adult room, where the young adults had been doing their program. So there was like chart paper all over the walls with all the questions that they've been asking and all the answers that they've been working on together. And it was like, yeah, this is my spiritual home.
You've just mentioned your partner, but is there anything that you want to share about your family with others at church?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah, so we've been unchurched because of the pandemic, which is a really unusual thing for someone who's training to become a minister. So, my daughter was born a week before lockdown started. And Oof. Yeah, she was born on March 7th. On March 14th, they closed our toddler's daycare, and we were in Toronto. Everything was closed, all the playgrounds, all the public spaces. And of course, that included church. And virtual church just doesn't work for a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. It's how old my kids are now. So we just didn't really experience Unitarianism, other than obviously my studies in seminary, for 2.5 years, really, because we were in Toronto, we couldn't attend there. We moved to Victoria. We weren't going to be doing virtual church. So I've just returned in the last 3 weeks, and it's been a real process for the whole family because Avery doesn't really remember. So I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Avery went to church for the first 2 years of his life. Of course, he doesn't remember that anymore. And so coming up here, I was kind of prepping for not just what is this experience going to be like for me, but what is it going to be like for all of us? Very fortunately for me, Jamie, my spouse, really identifies as UU, and he's really missed the church experience as well. So I knew he would be happy coming back, but I really wasn't sure how the kids would react to it because church is still like a really unfamiliar concept. But coming up here and seeing the the church grounds, the lizards running everywhere, the incredible work that you're doing, Anna, and the youth coming back and the kids coming back and seeing Time for All Ages again and the quilts. And my kids have really liked it, which has been phenomenal. And it feels like it's a place for all of us.
That's really, I think, good for other families to hear because it is absolutely a process. And I think a lot of people feel like they're doing something wrong if it feels awkward or if there's moments of tension or, you know, if there's resistance or fear or whatever. So I think normalizing that it is, yeah, that it takes steps and that there are bumps and that it's not necessarily a natural thing. It's a thing that you kind of grow into and learn. So
totally.
Thank you for being willing to talk about that, especially as a minister or a minister in training, right?
Yeah.
We all go through this. And then our kids get sick and then they can't come and, you know, welcome to the pandemic, right?
Yeah. And there's some stop start and it takes time for it to be comfortable, but I found this to be a really welcoming place for families. And, you know, you don't know because you are coming into a congregation where the vast majority of folks are older. They're in their grandparenting years. And we all have had probably some experience of church where it was it's better if the children are seen but not heard. So you worry bringing a 2-year-old into a service. You know, the first service I brought Elise to, Shauna said something about open yourself. You know, obviously she meant that metaphorically. And Elise at 2.5 started saying quite loudly, open myself. I can't open myself. What? And you're thinking, you know, there's this part of you that wants to be like, shh. But I found that in service, people seem really lovely about the natural disruptions that children bring in. And that's part of UU culture, I think.
When has spirituality failed you, lifted you up, or surprised you?
I mean, failed me is a tricky one because it's hard for me not to say when have I failed in my spiritual practice. You know, I don't necessarily think of it as spirituality having failed me, but I could go back to that story about being a teen and really losing any kind of connection to any sort of organized spirituality. Or actually perhaps more recently, I would also say the toxic positivity of a lot of new age spirituality, where as someone who has gone through quite a lot of grief and loss, hearing sometimes in spiritual circles that was something I brought on myself or manifested. And I think we've seen that get worse during the pandemic, that there's been in some places a real merging of a certain form of new age spirituality with a kind of lack of a care lens and a collective lens on the pandemic. So that's a way that I think spirituality, a certain type of spirituality, has maybe failed a lot of us. I'll go with surprised first because I think of a response to that. I call myself a reverent agnostic. I'm really not sure about questions like the afterlife or something called God, but I consider reverence very important to a spiritual practice. I think it's our experience of humility in the face of the natural world. It's part of how I understand reverence. But on questions of is there a God? Are there forces that we can't understand that are moving in our lives? That's something that I'm not very sure about. But I've definitely had times in my life where I've experienced something like the mystical, where it seems like things are aligning in ways that are hard to explain purely with my rational mind. So I have a couple examples of that. One is just, it's a funny story, but I was looking for a roommate. I had this wonderful woman that I was going to be living with, but we were a little bit like fire and water, and I knew we needed a third element in the group to stabilize it. That like perfect, almost like the coven, 3 is the minimum to establish a pattern. And we'd been looking for people, we couldn't find anyone. And this woman who subsequently wound up becoming, we've now been friends for, I guess, 15 years, very good friends. I was supposed to meet her after like meeting her on Craigslist. And I saw her blocks away biking up to meet me at a cafe. And I just said, that's her. Like, that's definitely her. And sitting and talking with her, yeah, she was the person. And she became also incredibly good friends with this other roommate that I had. And they wound up doing some really, really deep work on harm reduction together. They worked at a safe injection site, Drug Users Resource Center. They wound up writing a play about drug users together that the friend of mine that I met riding up on the bike, she took the lead on directing that and producing that. And they did this really meaningful work together. And we're all still friends. So it's one of those experiences where it was such a like deep and unambiguous knowing, like this person's going to be really important. And I find that I can't explain that. So Jamie and I got married on Haida Gwaii. We'd been living there for about 6 months at the time when I guess this is another one of these kind of surprise things. We weren't sure if we were going to get married. We weren't sure if we did get married, what it was going to be like, if we were just going to essentially elope. And friends of ours, as we were taking the ferry up there, they mentioned that they had found this essentially like church in the woods. And it's very difficult to find. It's like down a logging road. You have to really look out for it. There's a path down into the forest where this Haida family, the Bellises, built for their son an entire like cathedral in the woods with benches and outhouses. And it's right by an old Haida dugout canoe and a whole like kind of arbor for serving food. And once we went to see that place, we knew we were going to do it there and bring our community there and our new community from the island itself, from Haida Gwaii. Yeah, so it was a pretty big thing to pull off because like there was no running water, there was no way to get catering. We had people coming who had some mobility issues and we really had to figure out accessibility. And we really leaned on our community to make it happen, but also we set a lot of intentions around the spirituality of the event itself. Like we had a witch who married us, who hosted the event and facilitated the event. And we had a lot of poetry and a lot of intention setting. We had kind of collective choral singing. We sang Down by the River to Pray. And I guess like I'm not in a community where spirituality is necessarily a super comfortable topic. I think I am more now, but at this time, which was 7 years ago, our community was all activists, and spirituality is kind of a slightly divisive topic in that world, I think. And so I wasn't sure how people would feel about something that was so overtly spiritual. Like we're going to sing spiritual songs together. The witch is going to talk about the forces and the ties that bind us all together and what those mean. And but people really responded to it really well, and they really showed up in a really dedicated way to make it happen. So things just happened without me even really needing to be involved or make decisions. Like people decorated the spaces in these beautiful ways, and it did feel like it was kind of a spiritual coming together of a large group of people who hadn't come together with that type of intention before.
Wow. It's really amazing. And it's interesting how it's relating to community and relationship, right? Like,
yeah, I have a little quick story to tell about that, actually, that might help put it in more concrete terms. So our friends took us fishing right before the wedding was supposed to start. And Jamie caught a 40-pound halibut, which was amazing. And on the way back, I mean, Haida is this incredible, abundant place, and it's also so small. So people know you. So people knew us, and they knew we were about to have a wedding there. And as we were coming back, people started giving us the crabs from their crab traps. So by the time we got back to the dock in Dudgeon Gids, we had like, I don't know how many, something like 15, 16 crabs. But it was also like 11 o'clock at night. The sun was just barely setting, but it was 11 o'clock at night. Jamie and I had this moment of, well, it's great that we have these 15 crabs, but we have 15 crabs to deal with, and it's 11 o'clock at night, like the night before our wedding event is supposed to start. And then we realized, well, actually, we've got, I don't know, 8 or 10 friends, like friends who are family, all arriving in just maybe 8 or 9 hours. So if we can just keep these crabs fine until then, people are going to have their first experience of arriving on the island. Okay, like, time to get your hands dirty. We need to shuck these crabs. But it really transformed what was felt like it was going to be this onerous task into everybody getting there, sitting around a big table, harvesting together, and having that spirit of community that it was so amazing how it flipped the switch from this is really hard to this is really beautiful and enjoyable.
What do you hope that our congregation will do together, both in the world and for each other? Don't make yourself a work to-do list. Just see where the question is.
Yeah, that's such a good one. You know, I really liked what Reverend Melora said in the service 2 Sundays ago, that I actually had never heard that before, that every religion has its diagnosis and its prescription. So for Christians, it's, you know, sin is the problem, salvation is the solution. And for UUs, it's disconnection and reconnection. But reconnection with not just others, but also the deepest self. And I hope that our church will be that kind of place for the people that are here, for more people, for new people who might like to come experience that, who need that experience in their lives, and then for the wider community.
Anything else that you want to say to others at church? Anything I didn't ask you?
Just that if people see any reason why they'd like to connect with me personally or individually while I'm here, I would love that.
Till